think about, am I on the pursuit of the goal, the purpose, the assignment that I have set out for me, or am I attached to only doing it when it's attached to this particular thing over here?
Welcome to the Elevation Change Podcast, episode 10. And y'all made it to the season finale if you're watching this. Right? So I wanted to give y'all similar episodes, 10 episodes, just like a little season. And we'll be back for season 2. We'll start recording that. But this time we're talking about being vulnerable, right? So get ready to take your mind on a journey of transformation with the Elevation Change Podcast. This podcast explores the peaks and valleys of personal growth and the pursuit of a life with a purpose. And so again, I'm just talking about being vulnerable. And I really wanted to keep this as the season finale because as we take this journey, as we go into season 2, really as you reflect on the other podcasts, because I really hope that y'all go back, listen to it, and then start applying stuff, right? I don't just want y'all to listen to this and then forget the info and then do nothing with it. And you're like, hey, like, honestly, I would rather y'all go do something with this information than just leave and be like, that was really cool. Or like, I like the way he delivers stuff, or I like his podcast or whatever, and you do nothing with it. But I really wanted to bring up vulnerability at the end of this as the last part of the season, because this is something that most people, most leaders can't master, right? And so we go into a space where everything is perfect and you have accolades and you have all these things that you've accomplished in your life, and you almost kind of come off as like you've never been wrong, you've never done anything incorrect, which is like quite the contrary. If I really think about how I became the person I am today, it's because I've had a whole lot of, let's be honest with you, you cover your kids' eyes right, your ears right now. I've had a whole lot of shit that's happened to me. And that's why I've been able to become the person that I am. Now, one of my superpowers is because I can be vulnerable with other people, they can then start to believe in themselves. So when I'm on stage, if I'm consulting with somebody, if I'm coaching somebody, if I'm mentoring somebody, I don't mind bringing up the issues that I've had in my life, the things that I've gone through, because it really helps them frame it as I can really do this too. So the first thing I wanted to talk to y'all about is like you truly have to value vulnerability, right? Like there's so many people that's online right now, and this is for like the 3,527 million men's podcasts out there that's like, you got to be tough and you got to be masculine and all that stuff. No. It's okay, and you're still going to be masculine, you're still going to be feminine, you're still going to be whoever you are. I hate using these terms because you are vulnerable as a person. It just truly means that you can let go and release and talk about things that have happened to you in a sense that you're not afraid to acknowledge that something's happened to you or you've overcome something. So you truly have to like value this, because people, and I'm going to say this, people love a good comeback story. And if we don't watch movies, we don't read books, we don't listen to podcasts, we don't watch whatever we watch, we don't pay attention to whoever we pay attention to, because it just is, right? Like imagine watching a movie and the person gets born into a rich family, they do rich stuff, they take over a rich business, and then they just continue to do rich stuff with their rich family. Imagine we watch a movie where somebody's born poor and they do poor stuff and they can never get a job and they never get their life off the ground, and then they do poor things and then maybe they become homeless or they just live in, like a regular lifestyle or whatever. But that was it in the movie. No one wants to watch that. No one wants to pay attention to that. We want to, and this kind of goes into the next point that I have for y'all. We want to go into, have you overcome what it is that you're being vulnerable about, right? And so you need to lead by example. And so there's a lot of times where like people will talk about things that have happened in their life, and the question I have for them is, have you overcome it? And there's things in my life that I have not overcome. I'm working on it. And that in itself is me being vulnerable with people that I'm around, because I'm not perfect. And if I can walk through my life showing you my authentic self and showing you that, like, hey, I may achieve these particular things and I'm not perfect. Guess what? They can also look at that, because there are too many people who are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever, TikTok, and they're just showing the highlight reel of all the good things that they always do. And they've never been bad. And from birth, they've been able to buy the cars, the house, the clothes, the chains, the jewelry, whatever, right? The shoes that you want. They've been able to do all these things, and they've never had to do anything. So I need you to lead by example, which means like I need you to have your comeback story. I need you to get through what you've been through. I want you to really think about, like, is there something going on in my life? If I'm trying to teach somebody that, have I truly gotten over this? And this is going to be a hard take for some of y'all, because I want you to really look at yourself and say, have you really wholeheartedly gotten over whatever it is? There's a ton of people out here trying to serve you information, trying to do this fake vulnerable stuff, leading by example. They're like, if I could get through it, you can get through it too. And then when you talk to them, they clearly have not gotten through it. And there's a level of pain in themselves that, if they're siblings, exiled them from the family, or they've had some trauma that happened in their younger life or whatever. I'm not saying that it's easy to get over. What I am saying, though, is that you don't have to act like you got over it when you're still trying to work through it. And so the next part is so you value it. You talked about how you've overcome it, or how you're dealing with whatever's going on in your life and how you got to there. Man, you really got to create a safe environment. And I think this is something that I'm really good at doing, because people are okay to divulge their information to me. Whether they're having trouble with their spouse, they're having trouble with their kids, they're barely making it in life, whether they're struggling in their job, struggling in just their general mental health space. But I create an environment where people are okay to come to me, because they know that I'm not going to belittle them. I'm not going to, bring them to the next space. And this is the point that I want to make to y'all too, is like, you have to be approachable, because then people want someone that they can come to, right? But you have to keep it a safe space. And so one of the really powerful things for me is like I spoke one time at a conference, and there was a kid that came up to me, and he was in the crowd, and he ended up telling me, he was like, you remember when you talked about like how you have to really choose your friends, you have to really see who your circle is, and that's the terms that I brought it, like figure out who your circle is, of like who's gonna support you. And he was like, I started thinking to myself, and he was like, I'm only 12 years old, but there's a lot of kids that I have around me right now that he was like, all they do is bring me that negative stuff. And so he was like, every single day, every single time I talk to him, whenever I'm approached by them or whatever, he was like, all they do is bring me all their problems, and they just, basically what he was saying was they just emotionally dump on him. And he was like, I'm going to be honest with you, Corey. He was like, I'm glad you gave me that talk, and you talked about overcoming certain things. And you talked about how to really build, a person into a particular space, because he was like, I'm on the brink of like actually just committing suicide. And I thought it was real powerful, because at 12 years old, if this kid can identify that he's being approachable, right? He has a safe space, right? But then, and this is the next point I'm getting to, is then he asks for the help and support. He's there with his parents, and he's asking for help and support of how to get through these different things. He's seeking out their advice on how to get there, right? Like, clearly he created a safe environment because people feel okay to come to him. But then also you got to ask for help sometimes. And you got to be able to get through this together, because sometimes it could be a lot for somebody to get through. And so, like, I'm going to just recap those 3 things that I gave you real quick, which was, first, number 1, you want to create the safe environment, right? And that's after leading by example and all that stuff, but creating a safe environment. That way people can come to you. That doesn't mean belittle them. Take the information that they gave you and go talk to somebody else about it. Watch your facial expression, because sometimes people are talking to you and you're just looking at them like they're absolutely crazy right now. But they needed to get it off their chest. Be approachable and ultimately ask for help and support. right? Because you're going to need other people to walk this path with you. When you're vulnerable to other people, a lot of times it will drain you. It will bring your guard down to where all your energy is getting poured out because your emotions are high, or maybe you're revisiting situations that, although yes, you may be over it, it's a lot and it's taxing for you to sit there and feel that with this person who also has their problem, and you're pretty much working through that with them. So ask for help and support. Now, on the flip side, asking for help and support goes for those people who feel like they don't have anybody to go to, and who feel like, I'm trying to be vulnerable, but I can't find a person that's actually going to help me. Or maybe I've identified some people, and I talked about this on the last episode, that can mentor me. But the thing is like, I really need to ask for this help. I really need to ask for somebody to support me in this, because for me to continue this journey is going to take more than one. And I'm going to just be honest with y'all. That's a lot of times where I talk to people about, building high performing teams, like, building people, like you build a better employee. I mean, you build a better person, you build a better employee. When we talk about this, it's like, I'm trying to get across to them that they need to be the type of person to where they can ask for that support, that help. They can find the person that will really take care of them. So we've done all that, right? We've done all these things, and we've talked about, how to really be approachable and asking for help and all that other stuff. And I talked to y'all briefly about just like being mindful of your reactions. Because there's a lot of times folks talk and they'll have particular things to talk, to say, and it may sound crazy sometimes. And I've been in those situations where this person's saying, and they're answering their own question on how to fix themselves or how to get out of their current situation. And they're sitting there, oh man, Corey, if I could just do this, or I know I need to take the steps to do whatever to get, to bring my life on the right path and all this other stuff. And it's just not getting there. But then everything that they've said was actually the steps that they needed to take to get there. And my face, at least, it's hard for me to control my face sometimes. And I'm looking at them like, hello, you answered your question. Why are we still talking? But it comes with a level of compassion, a level of vulnerability to know that in certain situations, I knew exactly what I needed to do to get to where I was supposed to go. I knew exactly what steps needed to happen for me to do these things. To be honest with y'all, I read so many, what they call free 99, brochures and pamphlets and books and all this other stuff and worksheets that come from online. I gave them my email address. They sent me the 5 steps to do whatever. I've forgotten more about that. And I probably should be some multi-billionaire right now with 12 different businesses that run on autopilot, and I can live my life on a yacht somewhere and off in the distance. And I know that I probably know the information. I just haven't done anything with it. Where there's going to be someone else, and this is why I say be mindful of your reaction. There's always going to be someone else that can look at you and say, why haven't you? Or now you sound crazy because you know that information and you haven't done anything with it. So partially it's like you really got to check yourself. Like you really got to be mindful of your reactions towards other people, because then the thing is other people will read body language. And that's a point that I need to bring to y'all too, right? Like as you're vulnerable with people, as you yourself are vulnerable, be mindful of like your body language with certain folks. Are your arms crossed the way you feel like you're closed off? Are you fidgeting around? What's your facial features look like? Do you feel like you're looking at them with the sour milk face and it's like, why are you still talking? So think about that. Also be able to read their reactions. Right? Like when you're in a situation of being vulnerable with someone, you got to be able to read their reaction, because sometimes if you're too vulnerable with people, they become uncomfortable. And even I've been in that situation before where this person says, hey, I've been struggling with this. And it was quite confusing to me at the time. And I shared how I was in a similar situation. They said, hey, I'm no longer comfortable in this conversation. And in my mind, I was like, we are talking about the exact same thing. I just shared with you a situation that happened with me. And now all of a sudden that you're uncomfortable. Now the petty in me wanted to say, well, if you're sharing that with me and I'm not uncomfortable, then you probably shouldn't. Or on the flip side, if we're talking about the same thing and now you're uncomfortable, how do you think I feel? But you can't really approach those situations like that. You got to understand people where they come from. You got to be mindful of how they feel, how they react to certain things. And then, but you also have to understand, like, what are you sharing with certain people? Because and this is a lesser part, and I'm going to start to get to really the last piece, which is, in my opinion, the best piece to this. You get to a point where you got to start to understand, what am I sharing with folks? Because I've had people share things with me, and I'm always mindful of what I try to share with folks. But I have people that try to share things with me that are like deep, dark secrets, and I'm like, it's probably not what you want to tell me right now. You know, like, you probably don't want to share with me that, you know, you just, and I'm purely just joking right now, right? Like, you just kidnapped somebody. You don't want to do that. So I want you to start to be mindful of the things that are actually being shared, you know, what they're actually giving you. I talked about this in the last podcast. Sometimes set boundaries, because when you become vulnerable with people, then they think that you're always open to these particular things, and you got to set the expectation of, you know, there's times that we're going to talk about this, and there's times that we don't need to. And so the final piece I have for you is, you have to celebrate the successes together. And this is like, that's the last piece I wanted to bring you, because there are so many people who are so entrenched in the process, and they're so entrenched in what's the next step. And they're so entrenched in, this was the problem, this is what you brought to me, this is the problem that I shared with you, and I got over it in this amount of time. Why haven't you? And that's a level of vulnerability that you have to have with certain folks, and a level of understanding and comprehension that you have to have with folks. Because if we don't celebrate the small wins, if someone is having deep, dark thoughts every single day, and they come to you and say, you know what, I had a good day. If someone's saying, hey, you know what, my marriage is in shambles right now, and then you share with them, you know, how you got through certain things in your life, and they say, you know what, today was a good day in my marriage, celebrate the win. And you have to celebrate them together, because you also have things that you're overcoming. And people, and again, that's a different level, right? Like, this stuff is in layers. There's a different level when y'all start to share the successes together, that they know they can hold you accountable because you're still growing. And there's a lot of interactions where we can't just say, I used to have this problem, I got over it, this is what it was. And they say, I'm currently fighting with this scenario, but you almost come off as, there's nothing wrong with you right now. And I remember somebody approached me one time. They said, you know, Corey, it just seems like your life was set up for success. And the point I'm getting at is, like, you really have to understand where people come from. And there's sometimes where I don't share my vulnerability with certain people, so I come off like this. And they said it's almost like your life was set up for success. You know, it seems like you had good parents. You grew up in a 2-parent household. You know, you had everything that you needed to growing up. And I was like, that's interesting. And I started to share with them, it's quite the contrary. I grew up in a single mother household. I didn't have everything that I wanted. I didn't have the education that everybody else had. I didn't have the exposure to certain things that everybody else had. A lot of my exposures came through school field trips. Right? Now think about that. With certain parents, they're just exposing their kids to certain things just because that's what they wanted to do. Right? And so for this particular person, they started to look at me a little bit differently, like in a positive way, because they're like, I didn't realize that. But you carry yourself in a manner to where you didn't let that stuff affect you. And I don't ever hear you talk. I don't even hear you bring it up a bunch of times or like harp on it all the time. So you might be over it already. And then I began to share even more with them to say, like, you know what, there's aspects of my life where I'm not over yet. And I still struggle with it. And you can see it start to brighten that day, because they started to look at me and be like, you know what, this guy's not perfect, but he's achieved some level of success. And he's still not perfect. And he's okay sharing that with me. So I want you to start to think about that. That sometimes it's like when you're so closed off, And this is really why I wanted to bring this topic to you. When you're so closed off to people, they don't understand that you got to your level of success because of what you went through. They just think that for some reason you got lucky. And there's too many people with that mindset that just think that this person got lucky. This is how they ended up where they are. Well, it's quite the contrary. The reason they ended up where they're at is because they've gone through some stuff and they've overcome it. And the biggest key being, I've overcome it. There's a lot of times I'll even train someone how to speak. I'll train them how to use their stories, to tell a story, to get to the principle, to get to the point they're trying to preach. They're trying to drive home to somebody. And as they start to tell a story, they're not over it or they haven't overcome it. And you can tell that they're trying to just come up with something toward the end to make it a triumphant story or to drive their point home. And sometimes I end up sending them home and saying, look, that's something you got to work on. Don't tell a story because you choked up in your emotions. You can tell that you weren't empowering. You were upset because you talked about it. You weren't passionate. You were angry because you haven't gotten through it. And so that's how I wrap this podcast up. That's how I wrap up season 1. Thank you for listening. But again, I wanted to bring this topic to you because I think it's really important, because we have to start showing a little bit more vulnerability just in real life in general. We live in an age of highlight reels and fancy cars. Everyone has money. Mr. Beast makes a bajillion dollars a day, and we want to be like him. Well, that's not necessarily the truth for everybody. Some of us, we may get there. Some other people, that's not their goal. And that's okay, because what makes us come together as a people is being able to share stories of times where they had to overcome, of times that they didn't necessarily have their A game, of times where they were given bad information. So as always, I ask you, share this podcast with somebody, subscribe to this podcast, be ready for season 2. That's going to come of winter this year. I'm not going to make y'all wait for too long. Give me some certain reactions. Give me certain things that you want to see next season. But as always, as I wrap it up, I do this all because every single person listening to this podcast right now needs to strive to be someone that someone else can lean on. And with that being said, that is season 1 of the Elevation Change podcast. And we'll see you, I guess, when we come back, right?